Hi, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we are reading from Robin Hood, Chapter 22, Part 2. And if you remember, Robin had gone to Nottingham to attend a church service and was then taken into custody and thrown in prison by the sheriff. So Little John had set out after him, and he met a monk, and so he's trying to find out what happened. And that's where we start. Give you good day, said Little John, and bowed before the black monk. Do you come from Nottingham? We do, said the monk. Tell us the tidings, I pray you, went on Little John. There is a story beginning to spread in the country that a desperate outlaw called Robin Hood was taken yesterday. See now how these tidings take wing in a manner none may understand, cried the black monk. How the rumor came to thee I cannot say, but it is true, good yeoman. The strong rogue was seized yesterday in St. Mary's Church in Nottingham. I faith, was he? Cried Little John. Well, he hath had money both from me and from my comrade here. We are fain to learn the truth. He robbed me too, said the black monk. Hundreds of pounds did the false thief strip me of, but I had my revenge yesterday. It was I who discovered him and warned the sheriff. It was I who had the chief hand in his capture, and you may therefore thank me for it. May heaven reward you as you deserve, said Little John, and if ever we have a chance we will reward you also. And now, by your leave, we will go with you and bring you on your way, for Robin Hood has many a wild fellow in this forest, and if they knew that you rode this way, I faith ye should be slain. I know it, said the black monk, but we are well mounted and ready to flee at the first sign of danger. It is not always easy to mark the first sign of danger, said Little John, shaking his head solemnly. Therefore, we will attend you through the forest. So they went on their way chatting together, and the black monk was so proud of his exploit that he could not forbear from boasting of it again, and of the letters which he bore to the king. Presently they came to a place where the road ran through a deep dingle, and in the duskiest part of the way Little John suddenly seized the monk's horse by the head. The black monk was at once filled with suspicion, and drew his dagger from under his mantle and struck at Little John. Little John whipped a sword from under his leathern doublet and gave the black monk such a return stroke that the monk fell to the ground a dead man. He brought our master into this great trouble, said Little John to Much, and now he shall never go to the king to tell his tale. Much had seized the palfrey of the little page, and now he sounded his horn. Soon a troop of their comrades ran up, and Little John bade these bury the body of the black monk and take the little page into safe keeping till he and Much should come again. Next, Little John took the letters from the monk and mounted the horse. Much mounted the palfrey, and away they rode to London. When they reached London, they asked their way to the king's palace, and at the door the porter asked their errand. We bear letters to our lord the king from the sheriff of Nottingham, replied Little John, and we may not give them into any hands but his own. So they were shown into a hall where the king sat in a great chair, and a group of his lords stood about him. Little John went down upon his knee and held out the letters. Heaven save you, my liege lord. Heaven save you, my liege king, said Little John. I have brought your majesty these letters from the sheriff of Nottingham. The king took the letters and opened them and read them, and Little John knelt and stared in admiration at the king. And in sooth, Little John did well to admire that noble figure, the figure of Richard Plantagenet, Richard of the Lionheart. The bold, handsome face, the bright blue eyes, the stalwart, commanding form proclaimed Richard every inch a king, and Little John fixed every feature in his memory that he might describe the royal warrior to his comrades on his return to Sherwood. Suddenly, Richard raised one hand and dealt a resounding slap to the arm of his throne-like chair. What think you, my lords? He cried. Here be welcome tidings indeed from the sheriff of Nottingham. He hath seized that mighty outlaw Robin Hood of Sherwood Forest, and hath the knave safely in hold and waiting my pleasure. Good news, my lord king, cried the fat bishop of Hereford, who was one of the prelates standing about the throne. In truth, you are now master of the greatest rogue in Christendom. Have I not told your majesty how the rascal plundered me and hath used me despitefully many a time? Once he made me to dance for his sport in the greenwood, and once he sent me back to Nottingham with my face to the horse's tail. Glad I am to hear that your majesty hath him and will hang him at last. The bishop ended his speech, panting and out of breath, partly because in his excitement he had spoken so fast, and partly because the very sound of Robin Hood's name always put him into a furious temper. The king smiled and looked at the letter again. He did not seem much disturbed at the relation of the bishop's wrongs and sufferings. "There is never a yeoman in merry England I have longed so sore to see as this Robin Hood," said the king. "I must learn what kind of man is it who rules the forest as I, who am crowned king, rule this country." For a few moments there was silence. Then the king looked up sharply from the paper and fixed his bright blue eyes on Little John. "Yeoman," said he, "I learn here that this letter was dispatched by a monk, the high cellarer of St. Mary's. Where is he, and how is it that thou hast brought it?" But Little John was ready with his answer. "So please you, my liege lord," said the outlaw, "the monk died by the way, and the letters were entrusted to me to deliver to your majesty." The king nodded carelessly, for he cared not how the news came, so that it was true. "Now I will see this Robin Hood," said Richard, "and as thou, good yeoman, hast brought the tidings, so shalt thou fetch him before me." And Little John bowed to the earth. In token of his royal pleasure, King Richard gave the messengers a reward of 20 pounds, and made them yeomen of the crown, and ordered that they should attend on his royal person when they had made an end of their journey to fetch Robin Hood to London. With his own royal hand he gave the king's seal to Little John, and bade him to show it to the sheriff of Nottingham, and tell the sheriff to hand over the prisoner and to provide a guard of 40 archers to bring Robin Hood before the king. So Little John took his leave of King Richard and rode back to Nottingham with much at his side and the king's seal stored carefully in his bosom. When they came to the gates of Nottingham, they found them fast, and Little John beat upon them loudly and shouted for the warder. In a short time the warder looked over the wall and demanded his business. "What means this?" cried Little John, feigning great surprise. "The gates locked and barred in broad day? Hast thou slept late, warder?" "Nay," replied the warder, "the gates are kept shut night and day because we have Robin Hood fast in deep prison, and we bar the gates lest his men should rush in. As it is, they are ever shooting at the men on our walls." "Well, thou must open to me," cried Little John, "for I bring a message to the sheriff from our lord the king." When the warder heard that, he let them in, but the gate was at once closed and fastened behind them, and Little John saw that the portal was guarded by a strong band of men-at-arms. "I must see the sheriff at once," said Little John, and he was led to the sheriff's house and found the sheriff seated in the hall. "I have a message from the king," said Little John, and took the king's seal from his bosom and showed it to the sheriff. When the sheriff saw the seal, he rose from his chair, slid off his hood, and bowed as to the king himself. "What is the will of my lord the king?" asked the sheriff. Little John delivered Richard's orders, and the sheriff promised that they should be obeyed. "And what will be done with the traitor when you have carried him to London?" asked the sheriff. "There was talk there of hanging him on the gallows," replied Little John. "Good, good," said the sheriff gleefully. "A fitting end for such a rogue. But where is the black monk that bore the letters from me? He looked for preferment from the king on conveying such welcome news." "He hath had it," said Little John, "preferment so high that he will never return to Nottingham, he receiving a fitting reward." "Was it in money or land?" asked the sheriff. "In land," replied Little John. "He received enough land to amply content him. But I must go to an inn, my lord sheriff, and rest and refresh myself and my follower. We have to start tomorrow with the prisoner, and we are weary." "Nay, nay," cried the sheriff, "ye shall go to no inn this day. Ye shall be my guests, and this night I will make ye a merry feast, and the king shall learn that I know well how to entertain his messengers." So that night the sheriff made a great feast in honor of the king's messengers, and wine flowed in streams, and ale in floods, and all drank to the health of the king and to the safe hanging of Robin Hood. Little John was given a bed in a small room opening from the hall, and Much lay down on a pallet at Little John's feet. The two comrades waited till all was silent in the house, and they rose, wrapped their mantles about them, and took their swords in their hands. They stepped softly into the hall and went across to the room where they knew that the sheriff lay. They had to move very carefully, for the sheriff's men lay asleep before the fire and on the rushes spread over the floor of the hall. But every man was full of strong ale and slept heavily, and when they gained the sheriff's room they found that he also lay in a drunken sleep. This made it easy for Little John to draw the sheriff's ring from his finger, and that was all they needed. Next, they went down to the door, and there they found the porter as fast asleep as any, for he had been just as deep in the carouse. So Little John and Much opened the door and went through the dark and silent streets till they came to the prison where their master lay. Now they beat on the iron-banded door with the pommels of their swords until the passages within rang again. This noise called up the jailer, and he came to the door with the torch in his hand and demanded to know who was without. "Robin Hood hath broken prison and fled," cried Little John. "A careless jailer thou art." "By my faith, but thou speakest falsehood," replied the jailer. "He is safe in the deepest, darkest dungeon. I have seen him there but just now, and his bonds were upon him." "Natheless, we must see him with our own eyes," said Little John, "and we must know for a surety that he lies securely in ward." "And who are ye?" cried the jailer. "We are the messengers who arrived today from the king," returned Little John, "and we bring a token from the sheriff that you may know we are men of trust." In the door was a small, strong grating, through which the jailer might see those who sought admittance. The light of the torch was now streaming through the grating, and Little John held up the sheriff's ring full in the red light. The jailer saw it and knew it, and hastened to unbar the door. In sprang Little John and seized the jailer by the throat so that he should not call out and raise an alarm. In sprang Much and bound the jailer's hands and feet with the length of cord he had carried under his cloak. Then the jailer's head was muffled in his own jerkin, and the huge bunch of keys at his girdle fell into the hands of Little John. "Now will I be the jailer," said Little John. And first of all he locked up the true jailer in one of his own dungeons. Then seizing the torch he descended the steps toward the prison cells which lay deepest of all. Here he saw an iron door fastened with 3 great padlocks of steel, and forthwith he began to try the keys on the locks, for he felt sure his master was shut up there. 6 or 7 keys he tried before he found the right one, but at last the 3rd padlock was unfastened, and the curved bolt drawn from the heavy staple. Then Little John opened the door and went into the dungeon. On a heap of straw in the far corner lay a man fast bound, but as soon as the light of the torch fell upon him, Little John knew the figure and sprang forward. Robin Hood, for it was he, sat up and blinked at the newcomer, for the glare of the torch blinded him, so many days had he lain in dreadful darkness. "Master, master, I am here. Up, master, and escape." "Little John," breathed Robin in the utmost wonder, for though he knew his voice, he could scarcely believe his own ears. "Aye, master, it is I." Little John whipped out a keen knife and freed Robin from his bonds with a few swift slashes. Then he drew a second sword from beneath his cloak and placed it in Robin's hand. Up sprang Robin Hood, wild with delight to find his bonds stripped from him, and a good sword in his hand to guard his head. At this moment they heard a loud cry of warning from Much, who had been left above to guard the way of escape. Robin Hood and Little John rushed up the stone stairs, and as they went, a clash of swords and an uproar of voices broke out above them. They ran out into the upper passages to find Much hard beset by 5 men-at-arms who had rushed from the guard-room, having been roused to discover that something was wrong. With a mighty shout, Little John leaped into the fray, and Robin followed suit, and in a twinkling the guards were driven back into their room where they had been sleeping. "Off, off," cried Little John. "This affray will rouse the town, and that swiftly. Follow me," and he led the way to the outer door which had been left wide open. "To the west gate," cried Robin Hood as they sprang into the street. "The slackest watches ever kept there." But at that instant, clash, clang, clang, went the heavy bell in the turret overhead. Someone had rushed to the alarm bell, and was tolling it madly to arouse the town. "There will be slack watch at no gate now, master," cried Little John, as the thunderous clang of the great bell pealed over the sleeping city. "Yon bell will put all on the alert, and fill every street with enemies anon. This way, and he darted down a narrow lane, and his companions followed him. The night was so dark that in the narrow passage the 3 comrades could not see each other. Little John halted for a moment and thrust the end of his cloak into Robin's hand. Much took the hem of Robin's jerkin, and so they kept together and followed Little John as he wound his way through 2 or 3 lanes, for he knew every corner of Nottingham by day or night. At last he paused under the shelter of a pent house, and the 3 fugitives stood still to listen to the uproar which was growing in the town. The bells still clanged furiously, and the lights began to flash at windows, and people hurried from their houses, asking whether it was fire or thieves which assailed the town. "Stand still until the throng thickens," whispered Little John. "Then we will join with them and hide amongst them." Soon a number of townsmen with staves and halberds in their hands, and 1 or 2 with lanterns, came hurrying along, and in a short time numbers of people were running to and fro asking for news, and the 3 friends could leave their shelter and move amid the crowd without being remarked upon. Little John again led the way, and his friends soon understood that he was making for the house of Lob the cobbler. Just as they gained the head of the close in which Lob lived, they heard a man shouting to another, "'Tis Robin Hood has escaped and fled, neighbor. He hath broken out of hold, and the gates are kept, and the town is to be searched house by house." "Aye, faith, that piece of news concerns us," chuckled Little John, "and we must be out of Nottingham as soon as may be." So he went quickly down the close and tapped lightly on the window shutter, and Lob himself came to see who it was. The cobbler opened the shutter, and Little John thrust his head into the house, for the window was no more than a hole in the wall, and had no glass in it. "Lob," whispered Little John, "art alone in the house?" "Aye, John," whispered the cobbler in return, for he knew Little John by his voice, low as he spoke. "Well then, unbar the door and let us in," said the big fellow, and the door was unfastened, and in they went. Lob closed the shutter and lighted a lamp. When he saw Robin Hood in his house, he was full of delight to think that the great outlaw had escaped thus from his enemies. Now haste thee, Lob, said Little John, even as thou camest to warn us that our master was taken in like manner, must we escape this night. Come along to the roof, said Lob. The rope is ready coiled at the head of the ladder. So they went up the ladder which led to the roof of the cobbler's house and out into the roof, and thence they climbed to the top of the wall. And the rope was put round Robin's waist, and his friends let him down. Then much was lowered, and as for Little John, he hung by his hands from the top of the wall, and then leapt to the ground, for Lob alone could not have held the weight of his great body. Then Lob quickly drew up the rope, and went back into his house, while the three comrades hurried through the darkness. As they went, a cock crowed loudly, and Robin Hood looked to the east. By my faith, said he, we have not escaped a moment too soon. Yonder dawns the day, for it was all grey in the east, and the dawn was near at hand, and they ran on faster. In the town the sheriff was longing for the dawn. He felt certain that with the day he would once more seize Robin Hood. He had been roused from his sleep by the clangor of the alarm bell, and his wrath was beyond all describing when he knew that his famous captive had broken prison. But on the heels of wrath came fear, and the sheriff trembled. I dare never look in the face of the king, he cried, for should I come before him without Robin Hood, in truth he will hang me out of hand. I know his temper. So the sheriff urged on the search with the utmost fury, not only with the hope of putting the rope round Robin's neck, but also with the desire of clearing it from his own. Then he heard that no one had passed through the gates. When he heard that no one had passed through the gates, he felt a little easier in his mind. The knave is hidden by some friend in the town, he said. The day will soon break, and we will search house and shed and sty, but what we will seize him. True to his word, the sheriff searched the town from end to end, from cellar to garret, but all in vain. He knew it not, but while he searched, Robin was in merry Sherwood with a heart as light as the bird which sang on the bough in the May sunshine. Again and again he thanked the good friends who had brought him safe and sound from his great peril, and his yeomen waved their bows in air and shouted again and again to see the master safely among them. Then Little John said to Robin Hood, Master, I have done you a good turn for evil, for I could not bear to think that you should lie in hold and suffer a shameful death. Now I have brought you under the greenwood tree, and you are safe and sound. Farewell, and good day to you. Nay, nay, Little John, cried Robin, leave me not because of that hasty blow of which I repented sorely within a short time. By my truth, thou art fitter to command than I. I make thee now master of all my men and me. Thou shalt be our leader. Little John's kind heart was touched at this generous offer, and he sprang to Robin Hood's side. Nay, master, he said, by my faith that shall never be so. I will be thy follower as of old, and no other place will I take than that of Robin Hood's man. And so Robin Hood and Little John stood together under the greenwood tree as master and man once more, and the joyous outlaws celebrated this great day with a merry feast. As for the sheriff, he was in despair when the news came to him that Robin Hood was ranging the forest as gaily as ever. He wrote a most humble letter to the king and begged that Richard would forgive him, and said that nothing would have beguiled him had not Little John brought the king's own privy seal. Richard was so vexed to think how cleverly Little John had played with him that his bright blue eyes sparkled with anger and his fresh face flushed hotly. But anger never stayed long in the mind of the lion heart, and soon he took a loftier view of Little John's daring trick. By my halidom, my lords, he said to his courtiers, but that man was true to his master. I say, by sweet St. John, he loves Robin Hood better than he loves his king. Would that I had followers as true and loyal. Robin Hood is ever bound to him for this brave rescue, but I faith the road beguiled us finely. Surely there are not 3 such yeomen in England. I would give a jewel from my crown to see this Robin Hood who wins such devotion from his men. But he slips through the fingers of everyone. And Richard smiled as he thought of the fine reward he had given to the 2 yeomen whose only object was to thwart him and set their master free. As for the little page who had set out with the black monk, he liked the life in the forest so much that he became a servant of Robin Hood and never went back or ever wished to go back to Nottingham again, and in time he became as good a yeoman as any. We'll stop there today and start tomorrow with chapter 23. Thank you. Bye-bye.